Ladies and gentlemen, let me first thank the organizer uh, for inviting me for this very important convention where the issue of reservation in the private sector is going to be discussed. I understand that the Communist Party of India is going to have some position and some resolution on this issue. I also understand that there is going to be a convention in Delhi on the issue of caste and caste discrimination and violence on 27th of this month. Therefore, this issue is, it seems to me, is being discussed in a somewhat comprehensive way by the uh, Communist Party of India. I will therefore like to today discuss with you some of the issues related to reservation in private sector in particular, but also related to the issue of caste and Dalit to give you the background of as to why we need reservation in private. I will briefly discuss 3-4 issues and try to bring clarity on this subject. First is how is the problem of Dalit is similar to that of other worker and other laborer, but also at the same time how it is different from them, where it is similar and where it is different. I think we need the clarity on this issue to have a justification as to why the problem of Dalit is being treated slightly differently than that of other work. Then I will discuss what are the policies that are necessary to deal with the issue of the excluded community like Dalit. I will focus both on the general policies of empowerment, where I will discuss the uh, policies even for generality of the poor, and then the group specific policies which only focus on Dalit. The third issue then I will come and discuss with you is what policy private sector has accepted so far on the reservation. It is not that the private sector has not accepted. So I'll discuss what is the status of that policy and point out the success and the failure and the limitation of the private sector reservation policy that exists today. And then in the end, I will make some suggestion as to how private sector reservation policy should be there. Well, let me begin with the first question then, that how is the problem of Dalit is similar to that of other worker and laborer, and at the same time how it is different. And that difference really demand a separate uh, steps to deal with the problem of Dalit and their caste discrimination. The similarity between the exploited group or laborer or have-nots, uh, including Dalit as well as non-Dalit, is that both suffered from high poverty, both suffered from malnutrition, both suffered from hunger, both suffered from illiteracy, ill health, lack of political rights. So you can take any indicators. I do not want to uh, take your time. That even if you take poverty and have a look at the poverty for 2010-11 by taking Tendulkar's definition, that is the most accepted definition now. You can see that the poverty of the wage laborer, most of the poor are the wage laborer, farm or non-farm, or casual labor in urban area. If you take the poverty of casual laborer, both scheduled caste and scheduled tribe together, both scheduled caste and scheduled tribe and others together, because others are also wage laborer, then the poverty of the wage laborer is much higher compared to the farmer, compared to those who are owner of the private enterprise, who have capital, access to capital and regular salary. So labor suffer the most in terms of not having employment, not having income, not having enough money to eat, and therefore the poverty remains very high. And this poverty, there are similar causes: landlessness, lack of access to land, lack of access to capital to start the private enterprise, lack of access to education, as a result, less employability, less participation in regular salaried job. These are the causes of poverty, uh, which are similar to both Dalit and non-Dalit. There is no difference between the two. And therefore, they are at a one level, they are a one group, insofar as both of them suffer from high poverty, and insofar as their causes of poverty are also to a certain extent similar. Therefore, they should form in solidarity and one group, and they do. We have seen that the problem of Dalit worker and non-Dalit worker is similar, their poverty high, and the causes are similar. But there is one difference between the worker belonging to the non-Dalit and the worker belonging to Dalit, or Dalit as a whole and non-Dalit as a whole, or non-Dalit worker. If you disaggregate the poverty rates for Dalit and non-Dalit, or malnutrition rate, or the enrollment rate in higher education, or literacy rate, what you discover invariably that even for a similar wage farmer, farm wage laborer in Telangana or Andhra as a whole, the poverty of the scheduled caste and Dalit tend to be much higher, relatively higher than that of non-Dalit farm worker. Both are landless, both are casual labor, both don't get employment, and yet the poverty of Dalit is high, malnutrition is high. Literacy rate is high, illiteracy rate is high, access to higher education is low compared to the wage laborer. Which means that there are certain specific factors which cause a much deprivation among the Dalit worker as against the non-Dalit worker. I am not making a new point. And that factor is the discrimination that suffered in the past, and they continue to suffer the discrimination associated with caste and untouchability, which the high caste worker won't suffer. High caste workers suffer from high poverty because of several reasons associated with systemic reasons, but they do not suffer from the caste discrimination. Now here the caste discrimination is not in the domain of social relation alone, that you don't have access to water, you don't have access to road, you don't have access to, you are discriminated in public school, you are required to sit separately. This is a social sphere. You don't have an entry to temple in some areas. This discrimination is certainly there. But there is also a discrimination in employment. There is a discrimination in land market. There is a discrimination in wages, which probably the non-Dalit worker do not suffer, because they do not suffer from problem of caste and untouchability. Now that is the difference that one has to understand. That the working of the private economy, economy based on the private means of production, has its own mechanism and lead to the polarization, and everybody suffer, Dalit as well as non-Dalit. But in case of Dalit, the channel of causation is slightly different. The system affects them similarly as it affects non-Dalit worker, but the discrimination also affects them, their employment, their ownership of land, their ownership of private capital, their access to education, which the other do not suffer. And this was the point that Ambedkar had made in 1936 vehemently. Therefore he set up what is called Independent Labour Party. Communist Party was there in Bombay. Dange and Randive, prominent leaders were there. And this is the point that Ambedkar mentioned in 1936 in Annihilation of Caste, raised this question to the Marxists. But at that time, the communist leadership did not accept it. Communist leadership only said that no, there is only one working class, there is a homogeneity, there is a brotherhood. Ambedkar raised the issues that no, there are similarity between them as far as they all of them are poor, they are landless and resourceless, but there are differences in the sense that scheduled castes suffer from caste discrimination and the non-scheduled castes do not. At time, the non-scheduled caste worker became the party to the discrimination of their own brother worker. And therefore, Marx would say that your economic background brings the brotherhoodness, brotherliness, fraternity. But Ambedkar would say no, there is a lack of fraternity among the workers themselves. Insofar as there is a distinction between the worker from the high caste and the low caste. We have not studied that. We have studied discrimination quite a lot. But go to any village in Andhra Telangana and you will see that the houses of the high caste worker are not in the locality of low caste worker. They are in the locality of their own caste or in the company of the landowners. But the scheduled castes are separate. Social relations are not there. Interdining is not there. Intercaste is not there. So within the worker, there is a division. And if there is a division, if there is a lack of fraternity, if there is a lack of brotherhood, it creates difficulty in unifying them. And it can much more difficulty if the worker refused to consider the problem of caste, the way the communist leader did at that time in 1930s and continue to do so for so many years. So, but now the time has changed. The question that Ambedkar raised is now being appreciated. Now, therefore, now we have realized, even the Communist Party has realized the problem of caste discrimination and untouchability is genuine. It is a system of exploitation, it is a class exploitation as well as social exploitation, and gradually it has been accepted. And that is a great development and new development. I know in a recent past in Maharashtra there were several atrocities, and the Communist Party of India, Marxists, CPI, and several other groups came together and joined in the demonstration. I know that there were convention on the atrocities against Dalit women in Delhi, in which I participated on behalf of the Communist Party of India. So now, but after a very large time lag, we have recognized that the problem of caste is a genuine problem and therefore it needs to be addressed. Possibly there is a less of unity between the worker belonging to the scheduled caste and non-scheduled caste. The hesitation of the Dalit worker to join Communist Party or raise question against Marxism is because of the fact that we have not given due attention to the caste. Marx would say, you have nothing to lose but your chain of exploitation. And here is the high caste worker who think that I may lose certain privileges that I enjoy over the lower caste. Not consciously, but there is a feeling that even after the economic equalization, what would happen to those privileges that we enjoy? So I think in summary, what is important is that the untouchable face real problem. The problem of economic system and problem of social system, as against the non-Dalit who face only the problem of economic system. Not that they are not also victim of social system in a different way, but clearly one of the major problem of Dalit is the discrimination. Now, one point I want to make it very clear, that it is not social discrimination alone, it is economic discrimination. The untouchable were not allowed to own the land. Untouchable were not allowed to set up an private entrepreneurship, except the political occupation. In early 20s, a woman was arrested in Bombay by the police because she was selling watermelon. And when she asked in the police custody, she was told that untouchable cannot sell the consumable item. This is noted in Ambedkar's memorandum to the South Bureau Committee in 1990 and 1999. The important thing is that Dalit lost the property rights, access to property like agricultural land and private enterprise, not because of capitalism. Yes, because of capitalism, but additionally because of caste. Customary rules of caste putting restriction on ownership of land. And as a result, the proportion of landless, is much higher among the Dalit than among the higher caste. This customary rule of not having power to ownership of agricultural land and private enterprise was in many situations was converted into law. One of the classical example is Punjab. I was surprised as to why Punjab has the maximum population of scheduled caste in proportionate term, 30%. Of the total population in Punjab, scheduled caste is 30%. But the proportion among the scheduled caste of landlessness is 95%. 95% don't have a land. And I began to search, and then I discovered Ambedkar's writing of Punjab Alienation Act, Land Alienation Act. In 1901, an act was passed in Punjab whereby untouchable could not buy a land. Even Brahmin could not buy a land because the theory was developed that it is only the cultivating caste, namely the Jats, should have a land. If they are the traditional occupation is cultivation, they should be the owner, not only cultivator alone. So as a result, from 1901 to 1947, when this act was repealed, untouchable could not buy land. Few untouchable, those who had a money, they would buy the land on the name of a high caste without any guarantee that this fellow will give the land back or not. So this is the formal law, but customary law was much more strong. They did not have right to education. The non-Dalit poor, listen to me, because there is also a conflict among the left thinking that why special policy. The non-Dalit poor will have a less access to education because he doesn't have money or she doesn't have money. Nobody will deny an entry to a poor high caste in 1875 when the Britishers started public school. But untouchable would not have, simply because he is a low caste. Even Britishers started the primary school, high caste opposed. There was agitation. So one of the source of illiteracy among the scheduled caste is not poverty, it is caste. And this we failed to understand at that time in early 30s, and even today when the policy issue come, we don't realize what is the difference between Dalit and non-Dalit worker and poor. Why do they need special policy? The reason is our inability to diagnose the problem of Dalit and to say, let me repeat, to say that these are the similarity between the worker and the poor from high caste and low caste, Dalit and other. But these are also the differences which need to be addressed, and this is what we have sort of failed to recognize for pretty long period of time. Even today, we don't have a lot more clarity. Well, for the shortage of time, let me come to the policies now, because we are discussing the reservation policy for the private sector. What policies are required? I will speak only few minutes on the general policies. Now that the sources of poverty and malnutrition of worker and of Dalit worker, everybody, are similar in many respects, you require a general policy which is applicable to both. You require a general policy of land distribution, giving the land asset to everybody. You require a policy of giving access to the enterprises. You require a policy for access to education. You require a policy for access to health. You require a policy for having an access to drinking water, electricity, sanitations. You require a policy for equal civil rights. You require a policy for equal access in governance, which is required for both. And I need not repeat that. But in addition to this general policy, which is necessary for both Dalit worker and non-Dalit worker, or Dalit and non-Dalit people, you require an additional policy for the Dalit. Because the sources of their poverty partly lies in the caste. The lack of access to land, lack of access to enterprises, lack of access to education is associated with the caste and not with the economic system. And that lack of access because of caste is not the problem of the high caste worker to a greater extent. Women, yes, irrespective of caste background, women did not have a right to property and women did not have right to education. That is why Dr. Ambedkar brought Hindu Code Bill when he was a law minister, right to women. I don't want to go into that history. That's a very interesting history because high caste women themselves opposed this Hindu Code Bill for which Ambedkar was fighting. So, in addition to the general policy, you require a complementary and supplementary policy for the scheduled caste. And what is that policy? That policy is nothing precisely, but it's a policy of reservation. That is what we give the name, reservation for scheduled caste. Ambedkar, when wrote State and Minorities, when the constitution was to be framed, and what should be the future constitution of India, he submitted a memorandum on behalf of the Scheduled Caste Federation. He had converted the Independent Labour Party into Scheduled Caste Federation. And that memorandum was given to the Fundamental Right Committee of Constitution, of which Ambedkar was a member. He suggested two solutions. I'm not going to go into detail. Remedies against economic exploitation, irrespective of the caste. Remedies against economic exploitation. Nationalization of the land, nationalization of basic and key industry, nationalization of insurance, public education system, public health system, and public insurance. This is what is called state socialism economic program that Dr. Ambedkar submitted at that point of time. He probably thought that there are many socialists in Congress and they might accept this economic equalization program, which was ultimately was not accepted. But at a theoretical level, you must understand how Dr. Ambedkar draw a distinction. So he gave a set of remedies in which systemic changes were suggested for economic exploitation. And yet, he thought it necessary to have an additional remedy. The title is Remedies Against Social Discrimination and Economic Discrimination. Why did he thought? Because he was convinced that socialism by itself, by equalization of economic right, will not be able to eliminate the caste discrimination altogether. Because the roots of the caste discrimination are somewhere else. They are in the social system. They are in our social dogmas. And economic system by itself doesn't eliminate the social dogmas. Remember Mao. That's why he talk of cultural revolution. Therefore, he suggested remedies against social discrimination for the scheduled caste particularly, which is now extended to OBC and women, and the same ideology and same prescriptions have been extended group after group. He suggested three ways. One, law against discrimination. So anybody who practices discrimination, that should be banned and there should be a punishment. Ultimately, an Untouchability Act was passed in 1955 and Atrocity Act was passed in 89 because the high caste would oppose the Dalit when they seek the equal right and oppose violently. That is what caste described. And so it is called atrocities. 23 behavior of high caste are considered to be atrocious and subject to punishment. So act was passed. But Ambedkar knew that act by itself doesn't bring social change. Act by itself will not change caste system where the roots of the discrimination lies. Therefore, he suggested that Dalit would still be denied the equal rights despite the equalization program. That is what we left need to understand. You have a public school and everybody will go in public school, Dalit or non-Dalit. You have a college, Dalit and non-Dalit will go. But after having got that degree and make yourself employable, and when you enter to the market, I'll come to that later, discrimination in private sector. When you go to the market for employment, caste matters. The high caste worker and poor who got a public education and became a graduate, he may not face discrimination. On the contrary, he happened to be a Brahmin, he will get advantage of caste network. But Dalit will face discrimination. Therefore, you require a remedy. You require a solution. That's why Ambedkar then suggested, how do you ensure and fair access to the Dalit who are meritorious, who have equal qualification? And therefore, you require a mechanism whereby you give them the fair share, perhaps in proportion to population. And that mechanism of giving fair share in educational institution, in government job, and in politics is nothing but a reservation. Why reservation has a logic behind it. It's not come just like that. One has to understand that economic equalization by itself will not resolve the issue of discrimination. You require a special effort and safeguard. Therefore, law, an instrument whereby you get a fair share, you may call reservation, you may call affirmative action, you may call new measures, like somebody has quoted Malaysia, I could understand, or you call new policy in Northern Ireland, or hundreds of countries which have some sort of an affirmative action policy. So these are the two remedies that Dr. Ambedkar suggested. I think this has an implication for private sector. Why was it applied to public sector and why not private sector? One fails to understand. In America, it began with the private sector. Because discrimination happened in private sector, not in public sector. And therefore, if you have to have a safeguard against discrimination and a fair share, it has to be in private. But to begin with, it was not done. And now that issue has come, I will clarify on this issue in another 5 minutes and then finish. So, thus the Ambedkar's proposed dual policies: economic restructuring for economic equalization and removal of poverty among all, Dalit as well as everybody. But for the Dalit who suffer from discrimination which others do not, he proposed the policy remedies against discrimination in the form of reservation. But the private sector was excluded for whatever reason. Now, do we need reservation, extension of reservation in the private sector? Obviously, we need reservation in the private sector. The reason is that if discrimination is the basis for reservation in the public sector, and if the discrimination happen in private sector, because it is the private sector where the discrimination happens. And if it happens in private sector, then you require safeguard against discrimination in the form of a reservation policy. I don't want to go into detail, but I would like to say a few facts. The debate for reservation of private sector began in 2003 and it ended in 2008, after which the private sector accepted some sort of an affirmative action policy. I'll discuss that. So debate went for 5 years and I was one of the participants of that debate, very ferocious debate. And I have put all those articles, about 150 or 300 in that book that you will display outside. Reservation and private sector, quest for economic growth and equal opportunity. You can see the debate. And I was in the middle of it. The basic argument was why we need a reservation in private sector, because there is a discrimination in employment, there is a discrimination in business, and there is a discrimination in the other market as well. There is a market discrimination based on caste, probably based on gender. And therefore, if the problem of discrimination exists in private sector, we require a policy similar to that of public sector. Now, I would like to give, at that time I gave evidence that how the employment, let us take employment, forget about the other markets, how discrimination persists in employment in the private sector. There were very few studies at that time. I had done a study for ILO, but now there is a lot of considerable literature, and I would like to submit before you how discrimination takes place in a labor market. I want to give you a micro statistic, and please listen carefully. We have what is called organized manufacturing sector, and we have a formal and informal. But within that organized, we have what is called medium, small, micro enterprises. Medium, small and micro enterprises. MSEB, you might have listened to that. There is a recent survey of MSEB, economic survey of MSEB is going on. There is advertisement on television. A person will come and tell that these are some of the questions that we would like to ask you, you should answer. They go only to those houses where there is a private enterprise. There is a data of 2006 and 7. Now recent surveys here. There is no data on the caste background of the employees in the private sector. And therefore private sector would argue that no, we respect the merit and we don't respect caste. We don't take into consideration the social and religious and gender belonging of the employee. We only consider the merit. We gave some evidence, but this macro statistic brings out, and it is for you to decide. This is for 2006, 2007. By mistake, I think this data got collected because there is a common code. What this data does is a very comprehensive survey. 60% of our industries are micro, small, and medium enterprises. They account 60%. If you take the total employees in this sector, MSCB sector, you see that of the total employee, 14% are scheduled caste, 6% are scheduled tribe, 36% are OBC, and 43% are other. You can get a caste-wise breakup of the entire employee in the 60% of our industrial sector in this country, medium, small, and micro enterprise. So you can see that the scheduled castes are at the aggregate level fairly close. Scheduled tribes are less than that. OBC has more than their share of population, and of course others rest have a much higher share than their population. This is 2002-2003. But if you take 2006-2007, the scheduled caste account 11%, scheduled tribe 5%, OBC 32%, others 51%. Scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and OBC account much larger share of the population, and others little less, but the others account 50% of the worker in the MSCB sector. But what is important is, and that you should note down and listen carefully, that if you take the private enterprises owned by the higher caste, you get the caste of the employer also. That's very interesting. That's the beauty of this data. If you get the employer who own private enterprises belonging to high caste, what is their employment pattern according to the caste? And you get the following statistic in 2007. Of the total employee in the industries owned by the high caste, only 10% scheduled caste employee are there, only 5% scheduled caste, 21% OBC, but 64% higher caste, the people belonging to their own caste. You take the enterprise owned by the OBC. If you take industry which are owned by OBC, similar discrimination and disparities persist. In the enterprises owned by OBC, only 11% scheduled caste, 3% scheduled tribe, 62% of OBC. In the private enterprises owned by the OBC, the employees belonging to OBC 63% rather. Preference for your own caste in employment in the private industry. And others, higher caste, obviously only 24% because you give preference. The SC employees, SC employers, they are a lot more secular. If you take the SC employer, out of the total employment that they give, 37% is their own caste, scheduled caste, 5% scheduled tribe, 20% OBC, and 37% high caste. So scheduled caste enterprises are a lot more egalitarian in terms of the caste background of the employee. So if you say that our industry operates on the basis of merit, you have to interpret for yourself. But there are micro studies which I have done. I have quoted earlier. There are several micro studies which brings out the practice of discrimination in employment. My institute did a study. We sent 5,000 application in response to the advertisement appear in 4-5 English newspaper. 5,000 in a period of 1 year we sent the application, but the application were artificial and they were similar exactly, no difference whatsoever in qualification. The only difference was one was Dalit, other was Muslim, other was high caste. That was the only difference from their surname. And they were sent. And there was a fourth combination, a higher educated scheduled caste and lower educated Brahmin. And we only saw the response to the interview call. What do you find? Dalit has a 65% less probability to get an interview call. Muslim has 35% less probability to get an interview call. but higher caste have a much higher probability with the same qualification. But what is shocking and surprising, the probability of getting an interview call for a Brahmin who is less educated compared to the Dalit has a much higher probability. If you are a BA, you get an interview call, but if you are a Dalit and scheduled Dalit and BMA, you won't get an interview call. These are the primary studies. It was published in EPW, very systematic method. But there are other studies also. Madheshwaran from Karnataka has examined as to how caste account for the differences in the wage payment, caste account for differences in the employment. There are discrimination in other market as well. I don't want to take your time. Land market. We did a study. It's very extremely difficult for a scheduled caste to buy agricultural land in the village. Land gets circulated within the own caste. Even if you are willing to pay the market price, even if you are willing to pay a little more, and yet you don't get the land. You don't get a house on rent in high caste locality. That is a private rental market. You don't get a land. We have done a study now only, it's a 1 month old for a city of Delhi. It is extremely difficult for a Muslim to get a house in the Hindu locality. It is equally difficult for a Dalit to get a house in the high caste locality. There is a discrimination. Some get. It's not that it's not secular renting out, but the discrimination in housing rental market is equally rampant. Now, if this discrimination in the private market works, in employment, in land, in businesses, we have seen in Haryana, and you should see for Andhra Pradesh, I do not know. Nobody buys vegetable and milk from the low caste untouchable. If you have a cow under IRDP and you want to sell your milk, no high caste will come. The sale will confine to your own caste. You want to sell a vegetable, no high caste will come and buy your vegetables. If you have a kirana grocery shop, very few of high caste will come. Discrimination in the retail and the wholesale market. So discrimination prevails in employment, in land, in sale of commodities, in rental market in rural and urban area. And this is a very limited evidence because our social scientists have never studied caste-based discrimination, economic discrimination. The theories, economic theories of caste, all of them are from outside. None of the Indian economists have applied his mind as to why caste system operates and what are the economic reason for the caste system. Because there is also an exclusion in the academics in undertaking studies. So there is a discrimination that exists, and so there is no reason as to why there should not be a reservation policy for the private sector. Please, because of discrimination in employment, land market, and many other markets, that provide an explanation as to why poverty of the Dalit is higher than that of the other worker, why the unemployment rate of Dalit is higher than that of others. At all India level in 2010 and 11, the unemployment rate of scheduled caste is 11%. Average all India is only 6%. OBC is 6%. Others is only 5%. Why? The reason is to be found in discrimination. Now, this is the current situation, but nevertheless, the private sector, the CII, Confederation of Indian Industry, Associate Chamber of Commerce, and FICCI accepted finally that we will have some sort of an affirmative action policy. There was an agreement between the Prime Minister's office and the FICCI and the CII on the nature of the affirmative action policy. I am saying this because you have a course of action to follow. What is this affirmative action policy of the CII and other associations? The affirmative action policy involves certain codes. There are 15 to 30 codes that we won't discriminate, we will only respect merit, we will have a fair employment policy and all those kind of code. Now the company is required to sign that I undertake to abide by this code, which are essentially imply that they don't follow the discriminatory policy. They will follow a positive policy. But based on this code, the private sector, the CII, develop a affirmative action policy. This affirmative action policy, what is called very popularly 4 E's. 4 E's. And what are these 4 E's? First is educational policy in support of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Second is improving employability of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. That is the second E. The third E is promoting a self-employment, private entrepreneurship among the scheduled caste. That is the third E. And fourth E is, to the extent possible, try to give some sort of an preference to scheduled caste in employment. So education, employability, self-employment and employment. These are the 4 E's on the basis of which the private sector is implementing the affirmative action policy. What is the monitoring mechanism? The monitoring mechanism is that the CII on an annual basis will send the report to the Prime Minister office, Dr. Manmohan Singh. But the most important feature of this policy is that it is voluntary and self-regulatory. That is how I described it. Voluntary and self-regulatory. It will depend on us whether we should have this policy or not. And secondly, we ourselves will regulate this policy. The only thing that we will send the report to the Prime Minister office. What is the outcome of this policy? The outcome of policy is the following. I went to a convention, they invite me always. So I go to all affirmative action convention. And I went to one of the convention in Delhi for northern chapter of CII affirmative action policy. And fortunately, there was an additional secretary of Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. And he mentioned this statistic. He said that the acceptance, voluntary acceptance of this policy is very poor. And what is the statistic he has given? The statistic he has given is that there are close to 8,000 companies are the member of the CII, Confederation of Indian Industry, but only 800 of them have signed, which comes to 12 to 13%. Imagine, that is the outcome of the voluntariness of the affirmative action policy. Now, we do not know out of this 12% how many of them are actually implementing affirmative action policy. These are only those who have signed. And now, I understand that there is no report sending. This report was sent to Dr. Manmohan Singh. I do not know whether it goes to our Prime Minister, now new Prime Minister. The issue is, the limitation of this policy is that nowhere in the world, I have studied the affirmative action policy in 13 to 14 countries. I read quite a lot about that. Nowhere in the world the policy is completely voluntary and self-regulated. There is always guidelines of the government, and there is a guidelines with respect to what to be done and accountability to the government. It may not be legal at times, it may be administrative order, in somewhere it could be legal, but there is an accountability mechanism with the government through a certain agency. For example, in Northern Ireland, they have equal opportunity policy office. What does this office does? They don't have quota, they don't have anything. There the discrimination is between two Catholic community, Christians, Catholic and Protestant. Now the guideline is, employment, equal opportunity employment office guideline is that if there is factory which is located in a particular area and there is a population composition of Catholic and Protestant, in employment also in that factory, that balance should be reflected. Now, but each factory has to send the return on the religious denomination of the employees. How many Christians, how many Catholic and how many Protestants. Now, once they observe that in some factories, the proportion of Catholic is low and of that of Protestant is high, they will write a polite letter to that factory. That look, in your factory, there is a imbalance in your employment, which is not in proportion to the population of these two denominations of Christian community. And the factory is scared to the bottom because they might give in the newspaper. And once it is given in the newspaper, the whole prestige of that factory goes away. There is a social accountability, but there is accountability office. There is no law. But without law, there is an accountability. So that first question can be asked, why not the other 88% are not signing the code? So I think one of the problems that we face at the moment is the voluntary and self-regulating nature of this policy. How can we make being accountability and some sort of an legal provision. If not very harsh legal provision, I am in favor of that. I don't have a problem with that. But some provision, administrative provision, where the companies are obliged to follow and implement some sort of an affirmative action policy and also become accountable about the progress. I think these are the issues I understand, because I couldn't catch up the introductory speeches from the party. But these are the issues that you will have to face. First is that there is a discrimination. I have given the statistic to you, and that you require that legal protection and access to the fair share in employment in various markets. Forget about other markets. Dalit face huge problem. I have studied that in the other market, that is land market, sale and purchase market, hiring of transport equipment. You have your taxi, you have your three-wheeler, and you use it in the village, and the kind of discrimination that they face, we have in studies. There is a discrimination in the all government scheme, in midday meal scheme. It has been brought out in midday meal scheme that Dalit cook are not encouraged. So 60-70% of the midday meal Dalit food cannot be employed. The outcome is unemployment. So I think the issue for the consideration is that how do we make it accountable and obligatory in some form, so that and its coverage is increased. Now that there is a corporate social responsibility, every company has to spend 2% of their profit on social services and philanthropy. Here is an opportunity for them to have a special component plan the way the Andhra Pradesh and Telangana has. Well, I'll make a final point that I would like to make is that the existing policies are determined by the liberal policies, neoclassical economic policies, where there is an emphasis on privatization. Everything should be done by the private sector. It is not only employment, but now education has come. I have checked up the figure very hurriedly for Telangana. Almost 80% of your colleges are private, self-financing colleges, not the private aided, where the employment is not regulated. So education is being privatized. The supply of the amenities is being privatized. You have a private water available here. Rather than cleaning the public tap water, we provide the private waters. Electricity is being privatized. Water supply is being privatized. Recruitment is privatized. I would like to take 1 minute, and if the party can take this issue on the agenda. What are the methods of new recruitment methods now? The most transparent and egalitarian methods are giving advertisement in newspaper and employment exchange. And the employment exchange was set up by Dr. Ambedkar when he was a Labour member. Ambedkar do not get a due credit for his labor provision that he has made. All those provisions that you have, they were made by Ambedkar as a Labour member in 1942-43. But he set up employment in Calcutta for the first time to bring the clarity and transparency. The private sector now hardly use newspaper advertisement. 5 to 6% of their advertisements are recruitments are through advertisement in paper. 2 to 3%, 4% are through employment exchange. Read an article by T.S. Popola in that book. He has given the statistic. What are the new forms of recruitment? One is the on-campus recruitment. You go to the college, the best college, ask for the list of the best student, A-A, recruit them. Ask the people to apply through website. You do not know who is there on the other side, who is your employer. When you send your biodata, whether he take his caste into account, his village into account, or his district into account, you do not know. And third and most iniquitous is the agencies. The class 3, class 4 recruitment now has to be done through agencies. You cannot give an advertisement and apply applications and go through a proper process. No, you ask for the agencies. Who are these agencies? Do they follow the principles, or they consider caste, religion and other into account? We do not know. The first agitation should be on this. All methods should be made if at all they are there, they should be stopped, because there is an economic advantage for the employer. They save their cost. Instead of giving an advertisement in the newspaper in Times of India, which is expensive, you go to a college, get the best one. But they may not be the best one. There may be other one, Dalit and other who are in the society. So most inegalitarian processes we are using. We should ask for the recruitment processes which are transparent and egalitarian and everybody get an equal chance. So I will end by saying that in the process, in the policy regime where the privatization is going at a fast rate, covering large many sphere, even the public sphere, and the recruitment method, the scheduled castes who suffered from discrimination need protection in the form of reservation policy. In fact, why there is a increasing demand for a group specific policies, moving away from the individual focus policies? Scheduled caste and scheduled tribe were the first. Then came OBC. Then came women, 30% reservation in parliament. Then came Dalit Muslim. Then came Dalit Christian. Their demands are there. Why are they asking for group specific policy? We have to explain this. Scientists have to explain this. The reason is that they face excluded. They feel that they are not getting as much opportunity as others are. So better have a group specific policy than an individual focus policy. We will have to deal these issues. I think I have given you whatever I knew. I am so grateful to you. Andhra has been always very loving to me. They invite me and they honor me. So thank you very much.